Hi, I'm Odessa. On my wedding night, I realized too late I hadn't married a man, I'd married control, fear, a cage. Glass split under my hands as I jumped from a second-floor window, barefoot, bleeding, my torn gown dragging behind me. People said I ran to save my life. Truth is, I ran from a kind of hell that looked like love. Before we start, what time are you listening and where are you? Drop a comment. I read everyone. What came after that jump still wakes me. But to tell it right, we have to start before the vows. The violin started too early. I remember that, because I wasn't ready to walk. My mother gave me that sharp nudge on the arm, the one she'd used since I was a child, when she wanted me to smile through something painful. "Stand tall, Odessa. This is your moment," she whispered, her pearls glinting under the chandelier. The air in the Victorian hall felt heavy, almost sticky with perfume and expectation. The guests leaned in, smiling, whispering, their faces lit by the amber glow of candlelight. I should have felt joy, but all I could think about was how rehearsed everything felt. The flowers were perfect, the laughter too polished, and Thatcher, my soon-to-be husband, was waiting at the altar with a grin so still it might as well have been carved from glass. When the officiant began, Thatcher's eyes never left me. There was something in his stare, possessive, calculating. The vows we'd written together had been rewritten by him the night before. I hadn't thought much of it then, but when he said, "I will protect and keep you, always under my roof, always my responsibility," I felt the words dig into my chest like a hook. The crowd applauded, my mother dabbed her tears, and I smiled through the nausea. During the reception, the music was too loud, the laughter too sharp. Thatcher's hand clamped around my wrist every time someone tried to dance with me. "Stay close," he said, his voice sugar-sweet, but edged with something darker. When one of my college friends, a man I'd known for years, offered congratulations, Thatcher leaned in close, smiling for the cameras. "Don't embarrass me tonight," he murmured through his teeth. His breath smelled like champagne and control. I tried to laugh it off, but when the photographer asked us to pose, his grip tightened until my fingers went numb. My mother clapped from her seat, delighted by the image of a perfect couple. No one noticed the bruise already blooming beneath his ring. Hours later, after the last toast, the music quieted. The crowd dispersed, and the estate grew still. We climbed the old wooden staircase to the bridal suite, our footsteps echoing in the hall like a warning. I told myself I was just tired, that the tension was nerves. But when the door clicked behind us, I heard the distinct sound of a lock sliding into place, from the outside. He turned to me, eyes no longer the charming blue from our first date. "You think I didn't see you laughing with him?" His tone was low, dangerous. "Thatcher, it was nothing. He's an old friend. An old friend who couldn't take his eyes off you." His voice hardened. "You belong to me now, Odessa. You'll learn that." The room suddenly felt smaller, the air colder. The wedding dress, once elegant and light, now felt like chains. I backed away, heart pounding. "Open the door," I whispered. He didn't move. His expression didn't even change, just a faint smile. "You'll be safe here, as long as you remember who's in charge." Then his hand brushed the table beside him, a subtle move, but I saw it. His fingers rested on the keys. Instinct took over. My eyes darted to the window, tall, arched, and slightly open. Outside, the porch light across the lawn flickered. I'd noticed it earlier during photos. That faint glow became my lifeline. "Thatcher, please." He stepped closer. "Say goodnight properly." Something inside me snapped. I bolted toward the window, the lace of my gown snagging on a chair. He lunged, but I was faster. I pushed the glass, heard it crack, felt the cold air rush in. And then, nothing but the sound of shattering glass and my own heartbeat. The drop wasn't far, but it was enough to slice my foot when I hit the ground. The pain barely registered. My body moved on instinct, adrenaline replacing fear. I tore the rest of the hem, limping toward the hedge line behind the house. The autumn wind bit at my skin, carrying the smell of roses and smoke. Behind me, I heard him shouting my name, the door slamming, footsteps above. The night swallowed his voice, but I could still hear it. Rage, confusion, disbelief that his bride had run. I crouched low behind the hedges, trembling, staring at the flickering porch light in the distance. The tears came, silent and fast. That small glow across the street felt like the only thing tethering me to the world. "This isn't a wedding night," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "It's a warning." Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, or maybe it was just the wind cutting through the trees. The night had swallowed me whole, but morning demanded explanations I didn't have. By dawn, the hum of sirens broke the quiet. Red and blue lights spun across the lawns of Barton Hills, turning white fences into ribbons of color. I sat on the curb wrapped in a gray blanket, my dress torn, my feet bandaged. The cold from the pavement crept through the fabric, and for a moment I couldn't tell if I was shaking from the chill or from what had just happened. An officer crouched beside me, speaking slowly, as if to a child. "Ma'am, can you tell me why you ran?" His tone was polite, detached, like he was filling in a box on a form. I looked up, my voice barely steady. "Because he locked me in." Before I could say more, a familiar perfume drifted close. My mother's heels clicked on the sidewalk. She looked immaculate, not a hair out of place, despite the chaos. "Odessa Marie Vale," she hissed under her breath. "What in God's name have you done?" "People are watching." "Mom, please," I whispered. "You don't understand." "Oh, I understand perfectly," she said, forcing a smile for the officers. "She's exhausted. It's been a long week of wedding stress." Behind her, Thatcher appeared, calm, composed, as if he were walking into a brunch meeting instead of a police scene. His shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, his hair slightly tousled. He played the part of the concerned husband flawlessly. "Thank God you found her," he said softly. "She's been through so much. She's had anxiety before, sometimes panic attacks. She must have gotten scared." The officers exchanged glances. One of them scribbled something in a notebook. Another asked gently, "Ma'am, are you on any medication?" I stared at him. "No, I'm not crazy." But the word hung there. Crazy. Thick as smoke. Thatcher came closer, his hand brushing my shoulder like a stage cue. "I told her to rest this week." "She's been overwhelmed." My mother nodded, her voice syrupy sweet. "He's trying to help you, sweetheart. Let's not make a scene." For a moment I wondered if they rehearsed this too. The way their words fit together, smooth, practiced, suffocating. The officer's pen hovered. "So, you weren't in danger?" I opened my mouth, but my mother's glare cut through me. "I was," I said finally, though it sounded small even to me. "He locked the door. I had to jump out the window." Someone behind us cleared his throat. "I saw her jump." We all turned. The voice came from the neighboring porch, a man in his 50s, jeans and a faded flannel, holding a cup of coffee that steamed in the cool air. He looked like someone who minded his own business, until now. "I'm Harlan," he said, stepping forward. "I live across the street. She didn't fall. She jumped. And I've got the footage on my security camera." The air shifted. Thatcher's expression barely moved, but something in his eyes flickered, an instant of raw anger before the charm snapped back into place. "Sir," the officer said, "you're saying you have video?" "Yes, from my porch light camera," Harlan replied, calm but firm. "Time-stamped. You can see the moment she hits the ground." Thatcher forced a laugh. Cameras can be deceiving. Maybe she tripped. You know how brides get when emotions run high. But I could see it now, the crack in his performance, the faint twitch of his jaw, the too tight grip on his cufflinks. The officers exchanged looks again. One of them nodded toward Harlan. We'll need to review that. Thatcher's smile froze. Of course. Anything to clear this up. Minutes later, paramedics finished wrapping my foot. I felt weightless, detached, as though I were watching someone else's life play out. My mother stood nearby, arms crossed, refusing to meet my eyes. She was already rewriting the story in her head, her daughter, the emotional bride, the poor son-in-law, misunderstood. When the officers stepped aside to speak privately, Thatcher turned to me, his voice low enough that only I could hear. You really don't want to do this, he murmured. They'll take his word over yours every time. I didn't answer. My gaze drifted to Harlan, who gave me a quiet nod, steady, reassuring. He slipped a small card into my palm when no one was looking. If you ever feel unsafe, he whispered, call me. I closed my fingers around it like a secret. The officers returned a few minutes later. Mr. Vale, we'll follow up once we verify the footage. For now, it might be best if you take your wife home to rest. My stomach dropped. No. Thatcher smiled, taking the blanket from my shoulders. Come on, sweetheart. Let's get you home. The moment I stepped into the car, the door locks clicked. Automatic, mechanical, final. The world outside dimmed as the cruiser lights faded behind us. He didn't look at me while driving. His voice was almost a whisper. Next time, no one will believe you. I turned to the window. Harlan's porch light glowed faintly in the distance, flickering like a heartbeat, the only proof that what happened wasn't in my imagination. By sunrise, the house looked the same, but every door felt like a cage. I woke up to the sound of the lock turning, the same way a hunter checks if the trap is still working. For a second, I didn't remember where I was. The room was too bright, too still. Then I saw the pale blue wallpaper, the mirrored vanity, and the neatly folded nightgown on the chair. This wasn't my room, it was a guest room. And the door that had clicked a moment earlier? It didn't have a handle on the inside. A soft knock followed, and a woman's voice. Quiet, careful. Mrs. Vale, I brought your breakfast. It was the housekeeper, a woman I'd met only once before. She entered, avoiding eye contact, setting down a tray with eggs, toast, and coffee. When I tried to speak, she just shook her head slightly and whispered, "He's in the study." Then she left, closing the door behind her with that same slow, deliberate motion, as if afraid the walls themselves were listening. I sat there for a long time, staring at the tray. The smell of coffee used to mean comfort. Now it made me feel sick. I forced myself to eat a few bites, but my stomach turned at the thought of what might come next. When I finally opened the door, it didn't move. Locked. From the outside. Panic swelled in my chest, but I pressed it down. I needed to stay calm. I tried the window, sealed. Not nailed shut, but sealed with a latch that looked recently replaced. After what felt like an hour, the lock turned again. Thatcher stepped in, holding 2 cups of coffee like this was some quiet morning after a honeymoon. "Good morning, sweetheart," he said, smiling. "You look tired. Understandable after last night's episode." I didn't answer. He placed one of the cups on the table, sat across from me, and crossed his legs neatly. "You're safe now. That's what matters. We don't have to talk about what happened." "Safe?" I repeated. "You locked me in a room." He chuckled softly, shaking his head. "You're exaggerating again. I just wanted to make sure you didn't do anything impulsive." "Like, jump out another window?" I said. His eyes flicked to mine, sharp and fast. "Exactly." Then the smile returned. "You'll thank me later." When he left, I started searching. My purse, gone. My phone, gone. Even my ID. The drawers in the vanity were empty, except for a folded piece of paper with my name written in his handwriting. It read, "Rest. Don't worry about the outside world." I walked to the corner of the room where my laptop was charging, or so I thought. When I opened it, the login screen rejected my password. Access denied. Again. And again. By the time I heard him return, I was shaking. Not with fear, but with fury. He carried a small leather briefcase. "I thought we should go over some financial matters," he said casually. "Just for peace of mind." He opened it to reveal a few papers, stamped and signed. My name scrawled at the bottom. "You transferred our joint accounts into a trust," he explained smoothly. "For your protection. You've been under a lot of stress, so I handled it." My breath caught. "I didn't sign those." "You did," he replied evenly. "You don't remember because you were upset. I've spoken to your mother. She agrees you need time off from work. I've arranged everything." The words "time off" and "fragile" hit harder than any slap. "You called my mother?" I asked quietly. He sipped his coffee, unconcerned. "Of course. She's worried. She said to remind you that you always overreact when things don't go perfectly. She told me you used to hide in your room for hours after fights." I swallowed hard, my voice barely steady. "You're trying to erase me." He leaned back, smiling that patient smile again. "I'm helping you, Odessa. Sometimes people need to be protected from themselves." When he left, the air in the room grew heavy. I sat on the edge of the bed, tracing the faint marks on my wrist where his grip had been the night before. Then I remembered something. Harlan's card, hidden in the hem of my torn dress. I'd sewn it there, instinctively, before I fell asleep. It was still there. A lifeline, tiny but real. I looked around for paper, found a notebook in the nightstand drawer, the kind meant for guests to jot notes in. On the first page, I wrote the date and the time. Then every detail, the locked door, the missing phone, the falsified signatures. I whispered to myself, "If no one believes me, I'll make them read it." Outside, the Texas wind rattled the shutters. Somewhere downstairs, I heard Thatcher laughing on the phone, probably with my mother, telling her I was resting. That night, I heard the door click again. But this time, I wasn't the one being trapped. It was a softer sound, deliberate, like someone testing the air before stepping in. When I turned, Thatcher's mother stood in the doorway, holding my torn wedding veil as if it were evidence from a crime scene. Her perfume, something sharp and floral, filled the room before her voice did. "You shouldn't destroy beautiful things, Odessa," she said, walking in without waiting for an invitation. "You should repair them." The veil was neatly washed, pressed, and folded inside a pale pink gift bag. I stared at it, unsure if she meant the fabric or my marriage. "Mrs. Vale," I began, trying to steady my voice. "It was torn when I—" She waved a manicured hand dismissively. "Oh, I know all about last night. Poor Thatcher, having to calm everyone down. He said you were frightened. It happens. Young brides get overwhelmed." Her tone was sweet, but every word carried a needle. She set the veil on my nightstand and sat in the armchair across from me, legs crossed, perfect posture. I brought tea. It helps when one's mind races. I wanted to refuse, but the scent of chamomile filled the room. She poured 2 cups, sliding one toward me as if this were an afternoon visit between friends. "Did you sleep well?" she asked. "As well as someone can," I said quietly. She smiled, tight, knowing. "Do you remember what you said before the ceremony?" The question hit like a slap. I blinked. "What I said?" "Yes," she murmured. "You hesitated. Just before the vows. You looked pale. For a moment, I thought you might faint. You whispered something under your breath. Do you remember what it was?" I felt the air thin. She wasn't asking out of curiosity. She was searching for cracks, proof I was unstable. I said I was nervous, I replied. She took a slow sip of tea. Nerves or doubt? Her eyes didn't leave mine. I kept my expression neutral, but inside, my thoughts scattered like marbles on marble. Every answer I gave felt like walking barefoot over glass. When she finally stood to leave, she reached out and adjusted a strand of my hair as if I were a child. "My dear, marriage is about balance," she said softly. "One person leads, the other follows. That's how harmony lasts." The door closed behind her, but her words stayed, like smoke, clinging. Hours passed. I couldn't sleep. From the vent above the bed came faint whispers. I froze, pressing my ear to the cool metal. "She's too unpredictable," her voice hissed. "If she talks, you'll lose everything. Contracts, the trust fund, your reputation." Then Thatcher's calm reply, "She's not going anywhere." My hand clenched the bedsheet. They were already planning my silence. I slipped quietly out of bed, lifted the floorboard under the dresser, and retrieved my hidden notebook, the one where I recorded every word, every lie. I wrote a new line beneath last night's entry. "They plan to erase me." Then, carrying a small flashlight, I made my way to the library downstairs. The house was dark, except for the moonlight cutting across the grand piano. I pulled a hollow book from the shelf, one of Thatcher's decorative volumes, and hid my notebook inside. When I turned toward the window, I saw the faint flicker of Harlan's porch light through the blinds. It blinked once, twice, steady, then gone. Somehow that small glow reminded me I wasn't completely alone. Someone out there had seen me jump. Someone knew I wasn't crazy. The next morning, breakfast was served at the long dining table. Thatcher sat at the head, his mother beside him. The silence was brittle, only broken by the clink of silverware. She looked up from her plate, voice casual but cutting. "Marriage," she said, "is obedience disguised as devotion." I met her gaze, my fork still in hand. "Then I hope yours was a happy one." The air froze. Thatcher's knife stopped halfway through his toast. His mother's lips tightened into something between a smile and a snarl. "Careful, dear," she said softly. "Sharp tongues draw blood." I smiled back, steady. "Only if someone's close enough to be cut." Her eyes lingered on me, studying, recalculating. That night, when I returned to my room, the porch light was still on. It didn't blink this time. It burned steadily through the window blinds, casting a stripe of gold across the wall. For the first time in days, I exhaled. That night the porch light didn't turn off, and neither did the thought that maybe someone out there was waiting for me to move. 2 days later, I found a note slipped under the kitchen door. The paper was creased, the handwriting rushed but deliberate. "If you want to leave, wait until Thursday night. I'll keep the light on." I read it 3 times, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. Thursday night. The porch light. Harlan. It had to be him. For the first time in weeks, something inside me steadied. Not calm exactly, but purpose. I tucked the note under my sleeve just as I heard footsteps coming down the hall. I folded it twice, slid it into my pocket, and forced myself to pour another cup of coffee, acting like nothing had changed. The days that followed were slower, heavier. I started counting the hours differently, not in meals or sunlight, but in how long until Thursday came. I hid small things, preparing. A few bills I found in an old travel book, my wedding ring, my hidden notebook. I placed them in a shoebox behind a loose panel in the closet. Every move I made had to look casual, unplanned. Even breathing around Thatcher felt like pretending. On Wednesday afternoon, the housekeeper entered my room quietly. She'd been distant ever since the night of the police visit, but now she lingered. When she placed the laundry basket down, she whispered, "Not everyone here agrees with him." I looked at her, startled. "What do you mean?" Her eyes darted toward the door. "Just be careful." Then she walked out, leaving behind the faint scent of detergent and fear. It wasn't until later, when I took out the note again, that I noticed something. Something small, but undeniable. The handwriting. The loops on the L in light. The way the I leaned slightly right. It wasn't Harlan's writing. It was hers. The housekeeper's. I didn't know whether to feel relieved or terrified. By Thursday evening, the air outside had thickened with humidity. The cicadas buzzed like static. From the window, I could see the glow of Harlan's porch light across the street, steady as a heartbeat. I waited until the clock hit 11 p.m., when Thatcher usually retreated to his office with his bourbon and his laptop. My bare feet moved across the hardwood, careful to step where I remembered the boards didn't creak. Every sound in the house seemed magnified, the faint hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the grandfather clock, the whisper of the wind against the glass. The note said back door. I gripped the handle and turned it slowly, holding my breath. Then a voice came from behind me, smooth, icy, familiar. "Going somewhere?" My stomach dropped. I turned. Thatcher stood in the doorway, half in shadow, the note in his hand. He was still in his work clothes, tie loosened, sleeves rolled up. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Interesting little message," he said, unfolding it with deliberate care. "You think I don't see everything that happens under my roof?" "I found it," I said quietly. "Someone must have slipped it under the door." He stepped closer. "Of course they did. And now I know who." The next morning, the housekeeper was gone. Her room was empty, bed stripped, drawers open, the faint smell of bleach still in the air. When I came downstairs, Thatcher stood by the kitchen island, sipping his coffee. "She stole jewelry," he said simply. "Had to let her go." I knew he was lying. I also knew he wanted me to say something. "I'm sorry," I managed to whisper. He set his cup down with a sharp clink. "No, sweetheart. You'll apologize to me. For the misunderstanding." I looked up at him. "For believing someone might help me?" His jaw tightened. "For doubting me." I wanted to scream, to throw the cup, to run, but instead I whispered, "I'm sorry." He smiled faintly, satisfied. "Good girl." The words cut deeper than any insult. That night, after the lights went out, I stood at the window, staring at the faint glow of Harlan's porch across the street. I pressed my fingers against the glass and whispered, "I'm still here." For a long time, nothing happened. Then the light blinked, once, slow, then again, faster. It wasn't Morse code, but it was enough. Someone heard me. By the next morning, the house felt quieter, but it wasn't peace. It was preparation. The kind of stillness that comes before something breaks. When the delivery truck arrived, I thought it was groceries. The driver lingered by the gate, scanning a clipboard, before handing a medium-sized box to the housekeeper's replacement, a new woman I hadn't seen before, her expression blank. She set the box on the marble counter, wiped her hands on her apron, and left without a word. The label caught my eye first. Odessa Vale. My maiden name. My real name. The one I hadn't used since the wedding. Thatcher walked in moments later, still buttoning his shirt, coffee in hand. "You got a package?" His tone was light, but his eyes were sharp. "I guess so," I said, pretending confusion. "I didn't order anything." He circled the box slowly, as if studying prey. "Probably a mix-up. Still, we should open it. For safety." Before I could protest, he sliced the tape open with a silver letter opener. I expected clothes, or maybe books. What I saw instead made my stomach twist. Inside were my things, my old phone, my passport, a few photographs from my apartment before the wedding, one of them torn in half. The half that remained showed me and Iris, my best friend, laughing in front of a coffee shop. The corner was smudged, as if someone had held it too long. I looked up. Why would these be mailed to me? He smiled, setting his cup down. Because I wanted to keep them safe. You weren't ready to use them. Safe from what? I asked, my voice tightening. He tilted his head, as if explaining something simple to a child. From yourself, darling. You've been under a lot of stress. I thought it was better to hold on to them until you were ready to think clearly again. I felt the room shrink around me. So you've been intercepting my mail? Not intercepting, he said softly. Managing. The phone lit up for a moment before dying again. I reached for it, but he was faster. Careful, he murmured, pocketing it. It's probably dead anyway. When he left the room, I sat there frozen, staring at the torn photo still resting in the box. I picked it up. Beneath it was a small envelope labeled Voicemail Access. The sight of it sent a jolt through me. Later, when he went upstairs for a conference call, I retrieved the phone from the kitchen drawer where he'd hidden it. It barely held charge, but for a few seconds, the screen flickered to life. 37 missed calls, all from Iris. The last voicemail, dated the night before the wedding, played through a faint crackle. Odie, please, don't go through with it. He's not who you think. Call me, okay? Please. I found something you need to see. Then silence. I stood there, phone pressed to my chest, realizing how completely he had isolated me. Every letter, every message, every person who might have pulled me back had been quietly erased. When Thatcher came down again, his tone was almost tender. You look pale. Did something in the box upset you? I met his eyes. Why did you take my things? He smiled, the same calm expression he used when talking to clients. Because I love you. Because I protect what's mine. I forced a nod, letting him believe I was retreating. Inside, something else stirred. Not fear this time, resolve. When he finally left for the gym, I locked myself in the library. The air smelled faintly of leather and old books. I sat at the desk, plugged the phone in, and played the voicemail again. Not to cry, but to memorize every word. Everything Iris warned me about had been true. I looked around the shelves, found the hollow book where my notebook was hidden, and added a new entry. He took everything. Letters, calls, even my name. But he doesn't realize I'm still writing. Then I removed the SIM card, tucked it into the seam of my notebook's back cover, and replaced the hollow book on the shelf. As the sun dipped behind the trees, I noticed Harlan's porch light flicker. Once, twice, 3 times. A pattern now, not random. I didn't know what it meant, but I smiled for the first time in days. That night, I didn't sleep. I waited, because I knew someone else was about to move first. At 2:14 a.m., a sound broke the stillness. Footsteps, soft, deliberate, almost testing the floor. My body froze, every nerve awake. I listened again. The rhythm wasn't his. Thatcher's steps were always confident, loud, claiming space. These were hesitant, almost human, in a way his never were. The doorknob turned slowly. I held my breath. Then a whisper. Odie. It's me. The voice was familiar, low, trembling with rain and urgency. I opened the door an inch. Harlan stood there, soaked through, water dripping from his coat onto the hardwood. His eyes met mine, wide and alert. We don't have much time. I stepped aside before I even thought to. He closed the door quietly behind him, his hand shaking slightly as he brushed the wet hair from his forehead. What are you doing here? I whispered. He glanced toward the hallway. I saw the lights flicker earlier. I thought maybe you'd found a way out. When I didn't see you leave, I knew something was wrong. Thunder rumbled outside, low and distant. It made the windows shudder. He took a breath. I've seen what he does, Odessa. The yelling, the way he grabs your arm when he thinks no one's looking. I've heard it through the walls. I couldn't just stand by anymore. For a second, I couldn't speak. Hearing the truth out loud after weeks of gaslighting was like touching something hot. I flinched instinctively. Harlan reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded envelope. Inside were photographs, blurry, grainy images taken through his porch camera. In them, Thatcher's hand gripped my wrist. My face turned away, twisted in fear. I've been saving these, Harlan said, for proof. You weren't crazy. You were trapped. My eyes stung. No one had said those words to me before. We have to go, he continued. Now. There's a car waiting 2 streets over. The clock ticked softly in the background. I nodded, my heart pounding. I grabbed the small bag I'd packed days earlier, cash, the notebook, the SIM card. Every sound felt like it could shatter the plan. We made it halfway down the hallway when it happened. A crash, loud, sudden. A lamp had tipped from the table. The noise echoed like thunder inside the house. Then his voice. Calm at first, but sharp enough to cut through the dark. So this is your friend? Thatcher stood at the bottom of the stairs, his face pale under the flickering light. For the first time, the charm was gone. There was no smile, no mask of composure, only rage. Lightning flashed through the window, throwing his shadow across the wall. Step away from my wife, he said, his voice trembling with fury. Harlan stepped forward, trying to keep his voice even. You need to calm down. We're leaving. You're not taking her anywhere, Thatcher shouted, lunging forward. The struggle happened too fast to process. Harlan grabbed his arm. Thatcher swung wildly, knocking over a chair. I ran toward them, shouting his name, but my voice was swallowed by the storm outside. They hit the railing, grappling. I grabbed the nearest thing I could reach, a glass sculpture from the side table, and shouted, Thatcher, stop! He turned toward me, eyes wide and unrecognizable. I threw it, not hard enough to hurt, just enough to make him stop. It shattered against the wall, and in that split second, his foot slipped on the wet floor. He fell backward down the stairs. The sound of the fall, thud after thud, will never leave me. Then silence. Only the rain, tapping softly through the cracked window. I stood frozen, my breath caught somewhere between a scream and a sob. Harlan knelt beside him, checked for a pulse, then looked up at me. He's breathing. We need to call the police. My voice came out hollow. No one will believe me. He stood slowly, his expression steady. Then make them. Outside, the storm began to fade. A faint gray light pressed against the horizon. The house felt different now, emptied of power, heavy with consequence. By sunrise, the flashing lights of police cars painted the walls red and blue, and in that swirl of color and chaos, one question hung unspoken between everyone in the room. Who had really saved me? And who had I just destroyed? By sunrise, the house was full of flashing lights, and one question no one dared to ask out loud. They called it self-defense. I called it freedom, with consequences I wasn't ready to face. At the police station, everything felt too bright, too loud. The hum of fluorescent lights, the shuffle of papers, the low voices of officers discussing what had happened. They separated me from Harlan the moment we arrived. I remember his face just before the door closed, steady, calm, as if he was silently promising, I'll handle it. A detective sat across from me, notebook open, pen poised. Why didn't you leave sooner, Mrs. Vale? I stared at my trembling hands. They were raw from where I'd tried to stop the fall. Because he made sure I couldn't, I whispered. The detective's expression softened, but only slightly. You're saying he controlled you? Controlled everything, I said quietly. My mail, my calls, even the name on my driver's license. He wrote something down, the scratch of his pen louder than my heartbeat. When they finally let me rest, I was taken to a hospital room under police supervision. The walls were white and sterile, smelling faintly of antiseptic. For the first time in months, I could close my eyes without hearing his voice. But that didn't mean peace. A nurse came in and hesitated before speaking. "He's alive," she said softly. I turned my head toward her. "Thatcher?" She nodded. "He's stable, but he's telling a different story." Minutes later, I saw it for myself. On the small TV mounted in the corner of the room, a news report replayed images of flashing lights and police tape. Domestic incident at prominent real estate investor's home. Then my wedding photo appeared, cropped from one of the tabloids. The caption read, "Unstable bride attacks husband in fit of paranoia." I wanted to laugh, but no sound came out, just air and disbelief. When the nurse left, Thatcher's lawyer appeared. A man in a perfect suit, all polite smiles and poison. "Mrs. Vale," he said, "my client maintains that you and your neighbor conspired to harm him. He's considering pressing charges." I looked at him. "Conspired?" He folded his hands. "You see, the photographs, the ones from the camera, could easily be misinterpreted. And your journal. It paints a rather emotional picture, doesn't it?" I didn't answer. Not yet. After he left, I called for the detective. "I need my notebook," I said. He frowned. "We have it logged with evidence." "I need it," I repeated. He hesitated. Then, almost an hour later, the door opened again. Harlan stood there, tired but alive, holding something wrapped in fabric. My wedding veil. Inside it was the notebook, creased, worn, but intact. He handed it to the detective. "She's telling the truth. Everything's in here." The detective opened it carefully. Page after page, dates, times, transcribed messages, phone records, photographs of bruises, even a list of people Thatcher had threatened. "I recorded some of his calls," I said quietly. He didn't know. Harlan nodded. "She started writing the first week after the wedding, just in case." The detective's pen stopped moving. He closed the notebook and leaned back in his chair. "This changes everything," he said finally. Over the next few hours, everything moved fast. Thatcher's lawyer withdrew representation. His mother refused to appear in court. The story on the evening news changed from unstable bride to victim of coercive control. By the time I stepped out of the police station, the Texas sun was high, bright, unforgiving. The heat pressed against my skin like a weight I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. I clutched my veil in one hand, not as a reminder of marriage, but as proof of survival. "They'll never say sorry," I said, half to Harlan, half to the wind. Not him, not the police, not the people who believed him first. Harlan glanced at me, his eyes steady. "Then don't wait for them to. You're already free." For the first time, I believed him. But freedom, I learned, doesn't always mean peace. It means knowing how to live with what still echoes inside you. A year later, I still kept the torn veil, folded, clean, and quiet, just like the scars it covered. The mornings in Santa Fe were different, softer somehow. The desert light didn't shout like the sun in Austin. It whispered its way through the windows of my small art studio, spilling over canvases lined against the wall. My hands were steady now. I didn't paint to forget anymore. I painted to remember, just differently. I'd built something here, in a town where no one knew my past. The studio doubled as a classroom for the Women's Center 2 blocks away. On Wednesdays, I taught art therapy, how color could say what words refused to. Some women painted storms, others painted doors. One painted a single, endless road. I never asked what they meant. They always told me in time. That morning, the radio played a segment about new legislation protecting domestic violence survivors. I recognized the quote the reporter read aloud. It was mine, from an anonymous statement I'd written months earlier for a local campaign. "Freedom isn't running away," my own voice echoed through the static. "It's learning not to flinch when you hear a door close." I reached out and switched the radio off. The silence that followed didn't feel empty. It felt earned. A soft knock came at the door. The mail carrier smiled and handed me an envelope. The return address said, Austin, Texas. My breath caught, just for a second. I closed the door behind me and sat down at the old wooden table. The letter was from Thatcher's attorney. The handwriting was formal, detached, like someone trying to handle a ghost. "Mrs. Vale, this is to inform you that Mr. Thatcher Vale has been sentenced to 6 years in federal prison for financial fraud and embezzlement. He continues to deny all personal allegations related to your case and refuses to speak your name." I read the lines twice, then folded the letter neatly. A small, almost involuntary smile touched my lips. "That's fine," I whispered. "I said it enough for both of us." Afterward, I opened the cedar box that sat by the window. Inside were 2 things: the old notebook that had once saved my life, and the veil, cleaned, pressed, still faintly smelling of rain. I ran my fingers across the fabric. Once, it had symbolized everything false. Love built on control, promises made of silence. Now, it was something else entirely. A reminder that I had walked through fire and still found a way to breathe. The afternoon sun had deepened when I drove to the shelter. The building was modest but alive. Children's laughter in one corner, soft chatter in another. The director, a kind woman named Miriam, greeted me with a hug. "Back to teach already?" she asked. "Not today," I said. I came to leave something behind. In the main hall stood a new glass case labeled "For those who stay and for those who leave." Inside were small relics of survival, letters, sketches, a single broken locket. I opened the case gently and placed the veil beside my notebook. Miriam looked at me carefully. "Are you sure, Odessa? These are pieces of you." "They were," I said. "But not anymore. Someone else might need them now." We stood there for a long moment, neither of us speaking. I saw my reflection in the glass. Older, yes, but steady. The kind of steady that doesn't fade. That night, I walked barefoot outside my studio. The desert was quiet except for the faint hum of wind against the sagebrush. I tilted my head back, looking at the wide New Mexico sky, a quilt of stars, endless and alive. "I jumped once to escape hell," I whispered. "Now I'm learning how to walk back into life." The studio window glowed behind me, a single, steady square of light. Not a beacon, not a warning, just a home.